Chapter 8, Part 1 of Aircraft and Submarines by Willis J. Abbott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Incidents of the War in the Air, Part 1. In time, no doubt, volumes will be written on the work of the airmen in the Great War. Except the submarine, no such novel and effective device was introduced into the conduct of this colossal struggle as the scouting airplane. The development of the service was steady from the first day when the Belgian flyers proved their worth at Liège. From mere observation trips there sprang up the air duels. From the duels developed skirmishes, and from these in time pitched battles in which several hundred machines would be engaged on each side. To this extent of development aerial tactics had proceeded by midsummer of 1917. Their further development must be left to some future chronicler to record. It must be noted, however, that at that early day the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, pleading for a larger measure of preparation for the perils of war, asserted that the time was not far distant when this country would have to prepare to repel invading fleets of aircraft from European shores. This may have been an exaggeration. At that moment no aircraft had crossed the Atlantic, and no effort to make the passage had been made save those of Wellman and Vanneman. When the guns began to roar on the Belgian frontier, there was floating on Keuka Lake, New York, a huge hydro airplane with which it was planned to make the transatlantic voyage. The project had been financed by Mr. Rodman Wanamaker of Philadelphia, and the tests of the ship under the supervision of a young British Army officer who was to make the voyage were progressing most promisingly. But the event that plunged the world into war put a sudden end to experiments like this for the commercial development of the airplane. There is every reason to believe, however, that such a flight is practicable and that it will ultimately be made not long after the world shall have returned to peace and sanity. Airmen are not, as a rule, of a romantic or literary temperament. Pursuing what seems to the onlooker to be the most adventurous and exhilarating of all forms of military service, they have been chary of telling their experiences and singularly set upon treating them as all in the day's work and eliminating all that is picturesque from their narratives. Sergeant James R. McConnell, one of the Americans in the French Flying Corps, afterwards killed, tells of a day's service in his most readable book, Flying for France, in a way that gives some idea of the daily routine of an operator of an avion de chasse. He is starting just as the sky at dawn is showing a faint pink toward the eastern horizon, for the aviator's work is best done in early morning when, as a rule, the sky is clear and the wind light. Drawing forward out of line, you put on full power, race across the grass, and take the air. The ground drops as the hood slants up before you, and you seem to be going more and more slowly as you rise. At a great height you hardly realize you are moving. You glance at the clock to note the time of your departure, and at the oil gauge to see its throb. The altimeter registers 650 feet. You turn and look back at the field below and see others leaving. In 3 minutes you are at about 4,000 feet. You have been making wide circles over the field and watching the other machines. At 4,500 feet you throttle down and wait on that level for your companions to catch up. Soon the escadrille is bunched and off for the lines. You begin climbing again, gulping to clear your ears in the changing pressure. Surveying the other machines, you recognize the pilot of each by the marks on its side, or by the way he flies. The country below has changed into a flat surface of vari-colored figures. Woods are irregular blocks of dark green, like daubs of ink spilled on a table. Fields are geometrical designs of different shades of green and brown, forming in composite an ultra-cubist painting. Roads are thin white lines, each with its distinctive windings and crossings, from which you determine your location. The higher you are, the easier it is to read. In about 10 minutes you see the Meuse sparkling in the morning light, and on either side the long line of sausage-shaped observation balloons far below you. Red-roofed Verdun springs into view just beyond. There are spots in it where no red shows, and you know what has happened there. In the green pasture land bordering the town, round flecks of brown indicate the shell holes. You cross the Meuse. Immediately east and north of Verdun there lies a broad brown band. From the Woevre plain it runs westward to the S bend in the Meuse, and on the left bank of that famous stream continues on into the Argonne forest. Peaceful fields and farms and villages adorned that landscape a few months ago, when there was no battle of Verdun. Now there is only that sinister brown belt, a strip of murdered nature. It seems to belong to another world. Every sign of humanity has been swept away. The woods and roads have vanished like chalk wiped from a blackboard. Of the villages nothing remains but grey smears where stone walls have tumbled together. The great forts of Douaumont and Vaux are outlined faintly, like the tracings of a finger in wet sand. One cannot distinguish any one shell crater as one can on the pock-marked fields on either side. On the brown band the indentations are so closely interlocked that they blend into a confused mass of troubled earth. Of the trenches only broken, half-obliterated links are visible. Columns of muddy smoke spurt up continually as high explosives tear deeper into this ulcered area. During heavy bombardment and attacks I have seen shells falling like rain. The countless towers of smoke remind one of Gustave Doré's picture of the fiery tombs of the arch-heretics in Dante's Hell. A smoky pall covers the sector under fire, rising so high that at a height of 1,000 feet one is enveloped in its mist-like fumes. Now and then monster projectiles hurtling through the air close by leave one's plane rocking violently in their wake. Airplanes have been cut in two by them. For us the battle passes in silence, the noise of one's motor deadening all other sounds. In the green patches behind the brown belt myriads of tiny flashes tell where the guns are hidden, and those flashes and the smoke of bursting shells are all we see of the fighting. It is a weird combination of stillness and havoc, the Verdun conflict viewed from the sky. Far below us the observation and range-finding planes circle over the trenches like gliding gulls. At a feeble altitude they follow the attacking infantrymen and flash back wireless reports of the engagement. Only through them can communication be maintained when, under the barrier fire, wires from the front lines are cut. Sometimes it falls to our lot to guard these machines from Germans eager to swoop down on their backs. Sailing about high above a busy flock of them makes one feel like an old mother hen protecting her chicks. The pilot of an avion de chasse must not concern himself with the ground, which to him is useful only for learning his whereabouts. The earth is all important to the men in the observation, artillery regulating, and bombardment machines, but the fighting aviator has an entirely different sphere. His domain is the blue heavens, the glistening rolls of clouds below the fleecy banks towering above the vague aerial horizon, and he must watch it as carefully as a navigator watches the storm-tossed sea. On days when the clouds form almost a solid flooring, one feels very much at sea, and wonders if one is in the Navy instead of aviation. The diminutive Nieuports skirt the white expanse like torpedo boats in an Arctic sea, and sometimes, far across the cloud waves, one sights an enemy escadrille, moving as a fleet. Principally, our work consists of keeping German airmen away from our lines, and in attacking them when opportunity offers. We traverse the brown band and enter enemy territory to the accompaniment of an anti-aircraft cannonade. Most of the shots are wild, however, and we pay little attention to them. When the shrapnel comes uncomfortably close, one shifts position slightly to evade the range. One glances up to see if there is another machine higher than one's own. Low and far within the German lines are several enemy planes, a dull white in appearance, resembling sandflies against the mottled earth. High above them one glimpses the mosquito-like forms of two Fokkers. Away off to one side white shrapnel puffs are vaguely visible, perhaps directed against a German crossing the lines. We approach the enemy machines ahead, only to find them slanting at a rapid rate into their own country. High above them lurks a protection plane. The man doing the sealing work, as it is called, will look after him for us. Getting started is the hardest part of an attack. Once you have begun diving, you're all right. The pilot just ahead turns tail up like a trout dropping back to water and swoops down in irregular curves and circles. You follow at an angle so steep your feet seem to be holding you back in your seat. Now the black Maltese crosses on the German's wings stand out clearly. You think of him as some sort of a big bug. Then you hear the rapid tut-tut-tut of his machine gun. The man that dived ahead of you becomes mixed up with the topmost German. He is so close it looks as if he had hit the enemy machine. You hear the staccato barking of his mitrailleuse and see him pass from under the German's tail. The rattle of the gun that is aimed at you leaves you undisturbed. Only when the bullets pierce the wings a few feet off do you become uncomfortable. You see the gunner crouched down behind his weapon, but you aim at where the pilot ought to be. There are 2 men aboard the German craft, and press on the release hard. Your mitrailleuse hammers out a stream of bullets as you pass over and dive, nose down, to get out of range. Then hopefully you redress and look back at the foe. He ought to be dropping earthward at several miles a minute. As a matter of fact, however, he is sailing serenely on. They have an annoying habit of doing that, these Boches. Zeppelins, as well as the stationary kite balloons and the swiftly flying airplanes, often tempted the fighting aviators to attack. One of the most successful of the British champions of the air, though his own life was ended in the second year of the war, was Sub-Lieutenant R.A.J. Warneford of the British Flying Corps. In his brief period of service, Warneford won more laurels than any of the British aviators of the time. He was absolutely fearless, with a marvelous control of the fast Vickers Scout which he employed, and fertile in every resource of the chase and of the flight. In an interview widely printed at the time, Lieutenant Warneford thus told the story of his casual meeting of a German Zeppelin high in air between Ghent and Brussels and its prompt and systematic destruction of the great balloon. The story, as told in his own language, reads like the recountal of an everyday event. That to meet an enemy more than a mile above the earth and demolish him was anything extraordinary does not seem to have occurred to the aviator. I proceeded on my journey at an increased height, he says. It was just 3 o'clock in the morning, when all of a sudden I perceived on the horizon about midway between Ghent and Brussels a Zeppelin flying fast at an altitude of about 6,000 feet. I immediately flew toward it, and when I was almost over the monster, I descended about 15 meters, and flung 6 bombs at it. The 6th struck the envelope of the ship fair and square in the middle. There was instantly a terrible explosion. The displacement of the air round about me was so great that a tornado seemed to have been produced. My machine tossed upward and then flung absolutely upside down. I was forced to loop the loop in spite of myself. I thought for a moment that the end of everything had come. In the whirl I had the pleasure of seeing my victim falling to the earth in a cloud of flames and smoke. Then, by some miracle, my machine righted herself and I came to earth in the enemy's country. I was not long on the ground, you may be sure. I speedily put myself and my machine into working order again, then I set my engine going. This time the fortunate aviator returned safely to his own territory. He had then served only 4 months, had attained the age of 23, and even in so brief a service had received the Cross of the Legion of Honor from France and the Victoria Cross from the British. Only 1 week after this courageous exploit he was killed while on a pleasure flight, and with him a young American journalist, Henry Beach Needham, to whom he was showing the battlefield. During the early years of the war, all of the governments were peculiarly secretive concerning all matters relative to their aviation services. This was probably due to the fact that the Flying Corps was a brand new branch of the service. No nation was adequately equipped with flyers. Each was afraid to let its enemies know how insufficient were its air guards, or what measures were being taken to bring the aerial fleet up to the necessary point of efficiency. Investigators were frowned upon, and the aviators themselves were discouraged from much conversation about their work. About the beginning of 1916, the British suddenly awoke to the fact that even in war publicity has its value. It was necessary to arouse the enthusiastic support of the people for recruiting or for the conscription which ultimately was ordered. To do this, graphic descriptions of what was doing at the front in the various branches of the service seemed necessary. The best writers in England were mobilized for this work. Kipling wrote of the submarines, Conan Doyle of the fighting on the fields of France. The Royal Flying Corps gave out a detailed story, the authorship of which was not stated, but which describes most picturesquely the day of a flying man. In the United States it appeared in the Sun of New York, and sections of it are reprinted here. The following bombing will be carried out by No. Squadron at night, 10 p.m., 12 midnight, and 2 a.m. At each of these times 3 machines, each carrying 8 20-pound bombs, will bomb respectively P, C, H. Thus the operation order read one evening in France. Just an ordinary order, too, for bombing is carried out day and night incessantly. Bombing by night is usually carried out on towns and villages known to be resting places of the German troops, and it is part of the work of the Royal Flying Corps to see that the Hun never rests. Fritz, after a hard spell in the trenches, is withdrawn to some shell-torn village behind his lines to rest. He enters the ruined house that forms his billet, and with a sigh of contentment at reaching such luxury after the miseries of trench life, prepares to sleep in peace. He dreams of home, and then out of the night comes a terror of the air. A bomb falls in his billet, exploding with a terrific report and doing more damage to the already ruined walls. Possibly a few of his comrades are wounded or killed. Other explosions take place close by, and the whole village is in turmoil. Fritz does not sleep again. His nerves are jangled, and all possibility of sleep is gone. The next day he is in a worse condition than after a night in the trenches. This continues night after night. The damage to German morale is enormous. From the aerial point of view things are different. A pilot warned for night flying takes it as he takes everything else, with apparent unconcern. He realizes that he will have an uninteresting ride in the dark. The danger from "Archie" will be small, for an airplane is a difficult target to keep under observation with a searchlight, and the danger from hostile aircraft will be smaller still. Over the trenches the star shells of the infantry may be seen. Occasionally the flash of a badly concealed gun glints in the darkness, or the exploding bombs of a trench raiding party cause tiny sparks to glimmer far below. Probably the enemy, hearing the sound of engines, will turn on his searchlights and sweep the sky with long pencils of light. The pilot may be picked up for a second, and a trifle later the angry bang 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 of "Archie" may be heard, firing excitedly at the place where the airplane ought to be but is not. The pilot has probably dipped and changed his course since he was in the rays of the searchlight. He may be caught again for an instant, and the performance is repeated. Before long the vicinity of the target is reached, and he prepares to drop his bombs, usually 8 in number. A little before he is over the spot the first bombs will be released, for the trajectory of the bomb follows the course of the machine if the latter keeps on a straight course, and when it explodes the airplane is still overhead. Down far below will be seen a tiny burst of flame, possibly a large fire blazes up, and the pilot knows that his work is good. He then turns and repeats his performance until all his bombs are exhausted, when he turns for home. End of Incidents of the War in the Air, Part 1. Recording by William Tomko.